Hello and welcome to tutorial 127, and in this tutorial we're going to be looking at the development of exponential moving averages, but those adjusted for price gaps. So let me give you an example. I've got such a indicator applied to a 5-minute E-mini here, and you can see the white line is the normal EMA and the orange line is one adjusted for the gap, and we'll look at the program for that in a moment. But a Gold Pass member asked me, how would you go about doing this sort of thing for tutorial 87, which created an EMA using a PSP or a price series provider? So we're going to be looking at both. We're going to look at the simple EMA as we have applied here, and we're also going to be looking at the EMA adjusted for gaps that's developed based on a price series provider. So if you've not watched the video for tutorial 86, you might want to look at that. Now this program is somewhat different, but I think a lot of the same principles apply, so that would be worth looking at. So first of all, let's look at the simple program. I have that here, and this is called EMA, or rather _EMA_gap, and this is available for download. In fact, it's available for download for free by Gold Pass members, but it's quite a simple program, so I'm sure you could just type it in again, and it's essentially exactly the same as a normal EMA, but what we do is we detect if there is a gap, and we do that by comparing the current session and the last session. And we do that here. We set a variable current session equals current session 0. Then we compare current session, this bar. If it's not the same as current session last bar, then we calculate the gap as open minus the close 1 bar ago. The calculation is basically the same, but what we do here for the adjusted exponential moving average is we add in the gap value here, and then we subtract it within the brackets. So you can see very small difference. Then the final thing that we have to do is we have to reset the gap value after the calculation has taken place. So that's super simple. But doing this for an EMA using a PSP is somewhat more complicated. Now, one of the things about the PSP is it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of using multiple data streams in situations where you couldn't use a multiple, so you couldn't use data 2, data 3. For example, you might have advanced data types or tick bars or volume bars, and you need some data from another symbol or the same symbol at a different bar type, and you can do that using the PSP. The disadvantage of it is, or there are a few limitations, and one of those is that the PSP is not fully synchronized with the bars themselves, and we'll see as we look at this a little bit how that affects things. But anyway, let's go in and look at the program, and I'll just before we do that, I'm just going to explain the way I have the chart set up. So here we have a chart with tutorial 127 applied. The one I just showed you, this one has the underscore EMA underscore gap program applied, but the more complex program can be found here. So what I've done is develop the program. It does actually use data 2 in the sense that it uses the bar length of data 2, and incidentally this is just tested with a 5-minute bar in data 1, 30-minute bar data 2, and the reason I've done that is so that we can plot on the chart an actual EMA of data 2 just using the simple program, and then we can compare that, overlay that with the EMA developed using data 1 but using a PSP, which is the proxy for data 2. Let me just show you how that's set up. So we've got EMA underscore EMA gap applied to data 2, and then we've got tutorial 127, and that is applied to data 2. It appears on data 2, but it's using data 1. Probably sounds super complicated. Hopefully that'll become a little clearer as we go along. So let's look at tutorial 127. Now the first thing is the setup, and what we do is we use one statement to create a new price series provider. Now, as I say, this is based on the bar interval of data 2. It doesn't have to be the bar interval of data 2, but that's just so that we can compare the two calculations. We also determine whether we're using exchange data or local data, and we use this useful little bit of syntax here to do that. Then we load this PSP. And then finally, we create an update event. And this is going to be quite important to us later on. Let's just look at the update event. Got it up here. And essentially, we have the update event, but we say if args.reason equals price series update reason dot bar close. And then what I do, I just set a variable PSP bar closed to true. Again, if you're unsure of that syntax, you can get most of it or all of it using the toolbox and just clicking on these values here, and then that's going to create some designer generated code which you can copy into your main program. Now, this program has got two main areas of calculation besides the setup area, and the first one is for historic PSP bars. And what we do is we compare the PSP dot time of the current PSP bar with time last. And time last is set lower down the program to be equal to the PSP dot time, the PSP time of the current bar. So each time we store it in the program, and then we compare it as we go along. And when it changes, then we know that we have a new bar. We check that we have a certain number of elements in the PSP so that we don't get an error. And then we do a calculation, and it's very, very similar to the calculation in the simple program, except this time we have the subtle difference that rather than, let's just go back to this so you can see rather than having the average is equal to the average 1 bar ago, etc., what we do is we store the value that was 1 bar ago in a variable which I've called xav3 last and xav4 last. So the difference here, xav3, that is the one that's creating the gap adjusted EMA. xav4, that is the one that is creating the non-gap adjusted EMA. So we can't just say what was the value last bar because we're using the PSP. And if we just look back at the chart, you'll see that since this program is running on data 1, the value last bar is more than likely going to be one of these interim bars. And what we need to do is find out what the value was last PSP bar. We do that by each bar, we do the calculation, then we store the last values in this area here. And this only gets fired once per PSP bar because that is the only time that PSP.time 0 is not equal to time last. And also we've said get app info AI real-time calc equals 0, which means it's not a real-time bar. Now the other thing that you'll notice is we have to detect whether a session has changed, which we do very similarly to the simple program, and you can see if there is a change, we calculate the gap. We also initialize the EMA variables similar to in the simple program. Then we calculate the non-real-time, the historic bar values, and we plot them. So that's the historic. Now what about the real time? Well, the real time, we test if the bar is a real-time bar, and we're now transitioning from the historic to the real. If the PSP time 0 is equal to time last, that means that we were processing a particular PSP bar historically, now we're processing it in real time, so we don't want to update the xav3 last and xav4 last, so what we do is we set them back to the previous value. If we are in the next bar, then we can set those or leave them set as they were historically. Now I've left some of my print statements in here which I've used for debugging. You can just comment them out if you wish to. So you'll notice here we've got if initial is false, and that is because we only want this to happen once when the real-time session starts. So what we do is we reset initial to false every time we get a new session, as you see here, and then once we've started the real-time bars, we can then reset that to true, so that this won't run on every bar. It'll only run when we first move into real-time bars. Okay, and then the calculation is very similar to the one that we had above, only this time we're using PSP.close, 0 in square brackets. We've got the gap adjusted and the non-gap adjusted as before. Now the key thing here is this is calculated each tick. What we've got to make sure is that the value of the PSP, rather the value of the EMAs, is only updated to the equivalent of the last bar when the PSP bar closed. And you might remember right at the kickoff of this that we have a PSP update event that detects when the bar closes, and that sets PSP bar closed to true. When that happens on the next real-time tick, so if PSP bar closed, then we do this value. We set effectively what the equivalent of the last bar would have been for a standard bar, but for the PSP we have to do it differently. We do that when the PSP bar closed, and then we set the PSP bar closed to equal false. Again, I have print statements here which you can comment out if you wish to, and again we do the plot exactly the same, except this time we set the plot color to a different color, to yellow. So let's just go back to the chart, and you'll see we have the historic calculation along here, and then when we get into the real time, you can see this starts to get a little wiggly. And if I were to do a Control R to refresh the screen, now all the bars are historic, and you'll see that this is now calculated historically, and it will restart doing the real-time bars right there. So I don't want to make this tutorial too long, and I realize that I've gone through it at a very rapid rate, so please feel free to email me any questions about the tutorial, and I will answer those on the tutorial page. This program is available for download, and the simpler program is available for download as well. In fact, the two are packaged together, and the simpler program is available at no cost for Gold Pass members. So thank you very much.